Thanks, Michael. Our next presentation is from Associate Professor Roger Clarnette, and he's giving his, normally it's an annual Alzheimer's disease trial update. Hopefully we'll include Roger's rants. Roger's a geriatrician in the Department of Community and Geriatric Medicine at Fremantle and Health Service. He's the Medical Director of Alzheimer's Australia, the Research Foundation, and he's also Deputy Head of Department of Geriatric Medicine at the Fiona Stanley and Fremantle Hospitals. So thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. So it's good to be back here in person. So just so I can face the front, I'll just get my slide presentation on the phone. So I'll give a brief update of current research, and then we'll talk about some of the philosophical aspects of running trials and some light-hearted comments as well. So I usually start this talk by summarising the clinicaltrials.gov website. This is a US-sponsored website from Department of Health, and as of September this year, worldwide there were 2,930 studies listed. The website is a bit frustrating because it's not up to date, and many of the studies listed are no longer operational. There were 128 studies listed in Australia, of which 27 were therapeutic. So this is not a comprehensive list of current studies in Australia, but it gives a flavour of some of the science underpinning the current work that we're doing. And I won't be going into a lot of detail because there are other speakers later today that will expand on many of these studies. So we're all aware of the anti-amyloid monoclonal antibody studies, lecanemab, gantenerumab. There is another study using an antisense oligonucleotide, and of course these treatments need to be given intrathecally, so that's going to present a challenge for recruitment. We're also using an anti-tau monoclonal antibody, an insulin sensitizer, which is an oral tablet. We're also using a drug that affects filament A binding. Now, so filament A is a brain protein which is critical to the toxicity of A-beta 42, and the drug simufilam binding reverses the altered filament conformation and restores its integrity. So, as you can see, I'm not terribly familiar with how this drug works. We're also using a TNF-alpha modulator, which is more of an immune approach to treating the condition. There are a couple of studies that inhibit OGA, and this is a tau-based therapy, given that OGA competes with tau phosphorylation. So preclinical studies confirm that OGA inhibitors have efficacy in transgenic mice models. trehalose is a saccharide, a sugar molecule, which induces glucose deficits intracellularly, and this activates lysosomal and autophagic activity. So that's another interesting mechanism. Now, I should also mention I just wanted to mention the Probucol study. I think it's at the bottom of that slide, which is not visible. So use of Probucol is based on the work of Professor John Mamo at Curtin University, and his team created a mouse model that generated hepatic production of amyloid, and in the blood amyloid is attached to lipoproteins, and in this mouse model there was a lot of neurovascular degeneration, which was reversed with the use of the drug. So we've got that study running in Perth at the moment and hoping to establish sites in other states. Now this slide focuses on non-pharmacological interventions in Alzheimer's, and this is, I just trawled through the clinical trials database and looked for interesting non-drug approaches to treating the condition. We're all aware that the microbiome influences brain function, and there's a study in China focusing on a microbiome intervention. It's actually an observational study. Some of the interventions, there's a study in America using deep brain stimulation, another study in China with an interventional study on the microbiome combined with acupuncture. We're all aware of the use of transcranial ultrasound. There's a study in France using caffeine as an intervention. Now, the Sagromostin, that's a granulocyte monocyte colony stimulating factor intervention. Blood-brain barrier disruption with ultrasound, a ketogenic diet. There is quite a bit of evidence that the brain works better with ketone bodies as primary fuel. And radiotherapy, that's a Swiss interventional study. All right, so we'll move on to some of the other aspects of what we do in our clinical studies. We don't only interact with our patients and our work site colleagues, we also have significant interaction with the pharmacological industry, big pharma and clinical research organisations, and this is often frustrating, and I delivered Roger's rants the first time at the Melbourne meeting in 2017, and I got a bit of adverse commentary last year when I didn't include it, so here it is again. And many of you will have seen these slides, but for those who've not attended the meeting, this is some of the thoughts I've had on this very frustrating process, particularly as it relates to the training that we have to do, which for most of us seems quite pointless. So the philosophical basis of the training requirements, I think, relates to technocracy. You've got the definitions there, and in short, basically what this process does is waste our time without any discernible benefit. And these are some of the problems. We're all recipients of these anonymous emails instructing us to do training by a certain date. And of course, there's no one to respond to, and often we don't even know which study the training relates to. And often the emails come with the message, please do not reply, because no one will answer. So, very frustrating. So it provides very little useful information and does not lead to practical skill acquisition. And studies show that up to 80% of information provided to patients is immediately forgotten. 50% of the information that is recalled is incorrect. And I just wonder whether this is any different for any of us who spend half an hour learning how to put a signature on an electronic case report form. Because it's often, a year later before we actually need to go to the ECRF and put the signature in. So the training a year before is virtually useless. So at the bottom of this slide, I've got some of the responses that I receive when I can't get into a website. So when I do feel compelled to actually follow the instructions, it is important to put an investigator's signature in because the study can't move forward otherwise. But we're then met with a second layer of frustration when we can't access the website. And my particular favourite is that the website doesn't recognise the computer I'm using. So again, very wasteful of valuable time. All of our time is valuable. So we're all aware of this and we all react to this in various ways. And these are some of the software programs that we interact with. And I just prepared this from the list of websites, usernames and passwords that I refer to almost on a daily basis so that I can complete what's needed. And this is not comprehensive. Now, those sites that are bolded, they're sites that actually do facilitate access to more than one study. So things have improved in recent years. So Oracle Health, drug development, and shared investigator, one can access information from a range of different studies. So we are moving very slowly to some easing of the frustration of these interactions. But surely the people who create these programs and send us messages asking us to complete tasks can communicate better, and one must ask the question, who are the people who decide that these websites are necessary and the training requirements are needed? And who are the people that actually create these software interfaces? Because they're totally anonymous to all of us. We don't know who they are. The people that we speak to from the CROs don't know who they are. I've asked for the names and home addresses of these people, and nobody knows who they are. So there has to be a better way of communicating. Because, communication can be quite ambiguous at times, and effective communication is very important. So I ask, who are these people? And perhaps they're just long-haired, freaky people who needed a job. They didn't really understand anything about clinical research and running clinical trials. So it's a mystery. So 5 years ago, when we first talked about this phenomenon, I opined that perhaps for clinical trial staff and investigators, the impositions of this process could lead one to homicidal psychosis. Thankfully, I haven't read a case of that happening amongst the investigator community. But if you want to explore the phenomenon of homicidal psychosis, please watch The Shining, which was a film adaptation of Stephen King's novel. So the next question we should ask ourselves is, why do we actually accede to these ridiculous requests? And it relates to how we're employed, how we're trained to follow instructions. It's part of medical culture that we do that. And the long-haired freaky people can get away with this not only because they're anonymous, but they're protected from the consequences of what they foist on other people, and that's the same for any bureaucrat or politician. So these people have quite an influence over the poor people who are just trying to help patients by running clinical trials. And most of us receive a salary in one form or another, and that's the leverage that others have over us, because we rely on our work and our salary to make a living. So this book by Nassim Taleb explains this process beautifully. So this is quite a revealing comment. Someone who has been employed for a while is giving you strong evidence of submission. That's quite a powerful comment. Nassim Taleb says that for people like us, we should mainly talk to taxi drivers because they're independent operators and they see the world quite differently to people like us who are salaried and we're working in a field of endeavour where we have to follow instructions. And a couple of years ago we talked about some of Jordan Peterson's musings on how to live a good life and rules for life, and we talked about the pursuit of what is meaningful, which is Rule 7 from his book from 2019. And we talked about the ancient wisdom that relates to delay of gratification and the making of sacrifices. So we sacrifice our very important time by doing meaningless tasks so that we can help our patients. So that's quite a powerful psychological phenomenon. And at the last meeting, we also talked about options for dealing with this. We could just submit. We could start a 12-step program akin to Alcoholics Anonymous. And we can follow the rules at our discretion, because one of Jordan Peterson's other comments is that we shouldn't follow stupid rules because there are consequences for intelligent beings who follow and acquiesce to stupid rules, because it compromises our personal integrity. So there are consequences to not standing up to stupid rules. So, in summary, I don't think we should be too adversarial in our approach to the frustrations that occur with the training that we have to do. But we should be resolute in the hope that one day we will work in harmony with the long-haired, freaky people. Thank you.
Do you want to start with questions? Any questions for Roger? Or comments? No one's game to take you on, Roger. Thank you very much, Roger.